Hi, welcome to Story Time. I'm Kimberlyn. So I want to talk today about shift because, primarily that's what I talk about, right? Is that we use yoga as the practice, as the strategy, as the foundational philosophy to do life well. And to do life well, it means we have to navigate shift after shift after shift. And shift is going to happen. As a yoga therapist and yoga teacher, the connection that I speak of is not just to you and me, although I do love that. The connection that yoga invites us into is first, perhaps, the connection with ourselves, with the layers of our bodies, and from that grounded, aligned place, then we can connect with the world. Not just other humans and plants and animals, but the spirit, the spark of the divine. And so story time is really an opportunity to facilitate, to help guide and support you in finding your stories of authentic connection. So it occurred to me just recently, actually, that for a decade plus now, formally at least, I've been teaching the priority of self-care. Self-care is once again coming forth as our priority, as our reminder that we cannot serve from an empty cup. Those who have been on the front line are exhausted because their self-care has been interrupted in order to care for others. So as an advocate for self-care, it kind of went hand in hand for me to move from self-care to a deepening relationship with self-love. At least that was my experience. So whereas I kind of interchange the terms compassion and love and loving kindness, it really is about living ahimsa. Ahimsa meaning to do no harm. No harm to ourselves, no harm to each other, no harm to the world herself. And so we begin where we begin. And for many of us, that is in the measurable, tangible actions, the practices, in fact, of self-care. But the practices themselves are not going to cultivate compassion and love. I can do the things and yet not feel love. But in introspection, in reflection, I realize that there's a bit of a gap between doing the things we call self-care and feeling the thing that we call self-love. And so I want to take a step back today and maybe help to lay the foundation for the practice of self-care to move towards self-love. Because as someone who practices self-care and supporting others in their intentional practice of self-care, I can tell you honestly, I did a lot of self-care for years that never made it to the point of being self-love because they weren't rooted in compassion. They weren't rooted in ahimsa. In fact, self-care had become just another obligation, a duty, a responsibility. And in that light, it often became a burden. And I just wanted to check off the to-do list item. And yes, we might have to start there. We might have to start with just creating the task list. And that's what the 10 self-care practices give us, a checklist of sorts. Not just a checklist for did I do this, but more importantly, a thematic checklist of how am I investing my energy. And that we're going to save for another day. Today I want to talk about how we can move from that self-care to self-love. I think that this journey between self-care and self-love can be boiled down to essentially 3 practices. 3 simple baby steps, and the first of which is cultivating gratitude. Now, gratitude for some is the ability to say thank you. For others, gratitude might be having a sense of blessings. They recognize where they have been supported or loved or had a good break, maybe some even good luck. But I think what I want to focus on in this transition to help you shift from just doing the self-care practice to feeling self-love and becoming love itself is to look at the ways in which we can practice gratitude. Jen Pasteloff calls it seeing beauty, looking for beauty. And in that sense, we don't really have to have any specific skills or talents or tools or equipment. We just need to take a moment to look around. I just got some fresh flowers delivered from my local floral shop, and they are beautiful. And when I observe those flowers, and it makes me feel good because I'm also grateful that I can invest in local businesses and enjoy fresh flowers. It was a goal of mine when I opened my studio that I would have fresh flowers on a regular basis. Now, when I first opened, I couldn't afford to invest in flowers, fresh flowers every week. And now it feels so affirming to be able to enjoy these flowers, hire a local vendor, and bring a little outside in to our practice space. So in that sense, my gratitude kind of culminates. One idea leads to another. And in the meantime, I even love to enjoy my Lego flowers, always blooming, sometimes collecting dust, but the flowers help me to reconnect with that energy of gratitude. Now, the second practice that I like to employ is cultivating blessings. And there's a poem by Lisa Lowitz that always helps bring me home because it says, lovers count laughter, right? And it goes on to talk about other ways in which we might get distracted or our attention may be captured counting things that don't really matter. But when we look at counting our blessings or even just looking for blessings, we want to find those things that maybe were outside of our direct control. What do I mean by that? I've hired the floral shop to bring the flowers. But when someone brings me a gift of flowers or of chocolates or whatever it might be, to me that's a blessing. Why? Because it's outside of my direct control. Gratitude helps me facilitate an energy of investing in those things that I can control and creating the context, the environment, the energy that I want to live in. And by living from that place of gratitude, I teach others what I want to receive. And so literally there's a bag of chocolates that one of my students brought to share, not just with me, but to share with all the students that come through the door here. And to me, that's a blessing because it's outside of my direct control. And the third step, or the third component of this shift from self-care to self-compassion, and ultimately to self-love and embodying the essence of love in our beingness, is to reframe from love. What I mean by reframe from love is really the invitation to define our experiences, not from the defensive component of our brain stem, our very evolutionarily young brain, but more from our prefrontal cortex and even from our heart brain, to give people the benefit of the doubt, to express compassion by not assuming the worst case scenario, by not jumping to conclusions that require us to protect and defend. So when we practice gratitude, and we do so by looking for beauty, counting our blessings, and reframing from love, we can then practice what Bhante Sujata teaches. We can practice metta, or the practice of loving kindness. And loving kindness starts to redefine some of the things that we identified as our self-care, yes, because now they're being done from a place of metta, a place of love. So with that, we do our 10 self-care habits, but they have a little bit of a different layering of intention. And with the shift of intention, it will also shift our attention. Rather than striving or pushing through to do more, perhaps today we choose a gentler movement practice. Or perhaps today we ask for help rather than doing it all on our own. And eventually this loving kindness, this metta practice, transitions our relationships with the outside world. See, the metta practice begins by sending ourselves a blessing, and then we send others a blessing, a loving kindness message. And we start with those who are easy to love, and then we grow in that practice of extending and offering loving kindness to even those who perhaps are hard to love. Maybe they have even caused us harm. Now that's not to say that they're not held responsible for the harm that they do, but that we can still love and send them goodwill rather than withhold love or send ill will. So having cultivated gratitude and then loving kindness, we harness our energy into an intention of introspection and mindfulness. And it's in this place of introspection, of mindfulness, that the real transformation towards self-love and compassion begins. Because we have to have the experience, yes, whether that experience is shared with us from someone else's journey, or that experience is our own lived experience, our own stories. When we digest those stories, they open up deeper learning for shift and for transformation, for growth and for connection. And it's this culmination of gratitude and blessings and loving kindness rooted in opportunities to pause and self-reflect that we can then move forward to becoming love itself, embodying compassion. Now, before I close today's story time, I want to just wrap up with some, maybe it's an incentive, maybe it's an encouragement. Why do we want to practice loving kindness? Why do we want to become more loving, whether it's for ourselves or even for those who are hard to love? Well, there are some promises that come from the practices of loving kindness that say when we practice love, when we embody the practices of doing love, we enjoy the benefits. And there's 4 primary benefits that are identified when we can cultivate metta, loving kindness, through our practices. And those are that we become more loving to ourselves and others. We become empathetic. We have compassion in a practical way to support others in their journey, wherever they are. Thirdly, we experience more joy, more contentment, more ease. Now, the translations in the sense of what do we experience range from contentment to happiness and joy, but it's really that sense of being in alignment. And lastly, the 4th thing is that we gain a sense of equanimity. We feel balanced, which in and of itself may not feel too attractive. Think about getting onto a teeter-totter. You want to sit on one end because that's where the ride happens. And yet, equanimity does not mean that we forfeit the ride, the highs and the lows. It just means that we can ebb and flow with grace, that we can recover from the real devastations and not get lost in the elevations of success and achievements, that we maintain our humility and our sense of connection and gratitude, authentically living who we are, but also integrating and connecting with others in compassion. So while I think that these 4 benefits are enticement enough, sometimes we're a little hesitant to trust them. So I want to just reframe these 4 benefits of loving kindness practice with what happens if we don't learn to love, if we don't learn to practice and become more intimate with compassion and love. Just reframing these from the consequential side. Without loving kindness, we do not know how to love ourselves or others. Without loving kindness, we don't have opportunities to cultivate empathy. Without loving kindness, we lack joy and contentment. And finally, without loving kindness, we will continue to feel imbalanced, out of sorts, and ill at ease. But if I allow for introspection, if I allow for pause and being with these sensations, trust the process. You will move towards loving kindness as you become more confident in your practices of self-care, and as you become more competent in listening to your body's language, what it needs. And eventually that love for yourself will begin to extend to others, because you can see your struggles are not that different from everyone else's struggles. In which case, even if they are, you've had your struggles too. You've been intimate with that sense of strain and hardship and failure. And so we extend that generosity. We extend our compassion and empathy by reframing from love. And as we get really good at reframing from love, now that does not mean we're perfect. It just means our intention is consistent and accessible. We will move towards being love, embodying that sense of compassion and empathy. And sometimes that compassion shows up as holding others responsible. And sometimes it shows up as forgiveness. Love has many faces, but ultimately love is about helping each other live in greater alignment with authenticity, with truth, and to feel safe in our own becoming. I wish for you to know this love. And wherever you are in your practice, consider, is it the practice of self-care? Is it the practice of self-love? Or is it the practice of sharing that love, loving kindness with others, that is your next right step to shifting towards love? So I hope that today's story time not only helps you reframe your journey of highs and lows, of failures and successes, but more importantly, helps you get back on the path of self-care and maybe giving yourself a little extra wiggle room to cultivate self-love as you move towards embodying love as the way you be, the way you show up in the world. Thanks so much for letting me share these few minutes with you. And let me extend my variation, my version of the metta prayer, the metta meditation. This is what I wish for myself, and it is what I wish for you. May you breathe deeply. May you move freely. May you labor lovingly. May you live vibrantly. May you be well. Namaste.